Hi, I'm Joe Feeks, editor of Pig Health Today, and with me is Dr. Joe Connor. He is a veterinarian at Carthage Veterinary Service in Carthage, Illinois. I'd like to talk with you about making African swine fever control work. I know that you have visited China and you've had a firsthand look at what goes into managing that disease. I would like to talk with you about what you're seeing. For starters, let's assume that we don't have a vaccine, and that is the case now. How would you go about managing an African swine fever outbreak?
So that's what the experience and what we've been able to learn with our colleagues in China, because this particular virus um, creates high mortality, creates relatively repeatable clinical signs. But if it's identified early and confirmed, then by removing those pigs and removing, quote, pigs in contact, and by putting up solid barriers between pigs or groups of pigs, we've actually been able to salvage the rest of the population in those barns. And that is based on that the transmission is very close contact and primarily through body fluids such as blood. And so if we take steps to manage carcasses, manage removals, they've actually been quite successful of, again, only removing infected animals, continuing to test in contact animals, and been able to maintain the rest of the population as free with a really a restricted partial depopulation.
Now, when you look at your experiences with African swine fever and your decades of experience managing other viral diseases in pigs, does African swine fever remind you of any other major virus you've tackled?
Not directly. I think what we have a tendency to do is uh, put viruses together as we think about respiratory viruses and we think about transmission. In this particular case, it's a great reminder that we should think about the individual virus. And because this virus does not readily transmit by aerosol, and almost all transmission is direct contact, now you can start thinking about such things as how do I remove the individual animal or individual animals, or how do I put up solid barriers that would prevent direct animal contact? When that is coupled with pig side diagnostics, so PCRs that can be utilized with individual samples and decisions made on animal removal, then you can be successful. Joe, the other thing that becomes very important, and that is through unfortunate experiences of the production people and veterinarians, it is early recognition of a sow or a pig that would be becoming infected with ASF and taking those steps immediately, those steps to sample that pig and run the pig side PCR, very quick results that would say either a positive or a negative, and then take the steps to remove that pig or the in contact pigs if it's on a pin basis.
The veterinarian, of course, isn't always there when the signs first appear. It's often up to the caregivers who are on the premises. What have the caregivers learned about African swine fever and recognizing the symptoms?
Typically what they're going to look for are animals that are off feed, and they'll be much more aggressive in assessing individual animals off feed, and then ones that are becoming recumbent, slow to rise. Those would be the ones that they would sample. Again, they have available quote pig side PCRs, and would determine those to be either as positive or negative, and then go into their next steps of control and removal.
Just looking at your experience with the disease and your knowledge of vaccination, how would you see herd management and specifically partial depopulation working in sync with vaccines?
One of the things that we do want to avoid is that in the Asian countries, they immediately used modified live vaccines that had not been either differential vaccines or always determined to be safe. So what the result has occurring is that now there's multiple strains of ASF circulating in some of those populations. As I previously mentioned, a important part of the containment is having a pig-side PCR. That becomes problematic if the primers in the PCR do not detect that particular strain of virus. And so that's something we want to avoid in the US. And so that's one reason why you regulate vaccines and be sure that they are safe before they're applied. The second thing with that is that for vaccine usage to be accepted, it would take a change in our regulations, and particularly with the OIE in terms of how exports are looked at to allow movement of product between countries. Having said that, though, with the development that is occurring, which is recent data indicating that we do have the ability to potentially manufacture a gene-deleted vaccine that is safe, so does not shed for any periods of time, does not revert to any wild-type virus, and can easily have a differential test. So then you can think about more wide use of vaccine or zone use of vaccine that would allow you to protect the animals, differentiate infected animals from non-infected animals, and couple that with then potentially a test and removal like we did in the eradication of pseudorabies. So the coming together of vaccine technology, differential technology with good pig management and removal management does allow us the opportunity to think forward and would allow us to control this virus in a much more economical manner.
And is that why you advocate partial depopulation? Because clearly, if you did a total depop, that's generally a good way to hit the reset button on a herd health program.
Yeah, I expect, Joe, that it would be a combination of that. And so if you think about the growing pig, total depopulation, at least in an area, is still likely going to be the most economical. But then going forward, vaccination and surveillance would likely be the most economical approach. If we then separate out the sow or the breeding herd by itself, there's where vaccination and individual or partial removal or partial depopulation generally is the most economical, particularly as we get outside of the immediate infected or hot zone.
What can we be doing now in the United States in terms of biosecurity to provide even more protection against this dreaded disease?
The important thing, Joe, is continue to emphasize and continue to put in the infrastructure. So if we remove ourselves from the risk of ASF, we still have transmission of diseases due to biosecurity weaknesses. Areas that we particularly want to continue to focus on is transportation biosecurity, with increasing emphasis on the finishing transportation to prevent reinfection back to or contamination back to our finishing barns, and then that being moved farther up the chain. The second thing that has been emphasized the last 2 years has been that we need to put more emphasis on transportation and also movement of cull sows.
As you well know, Joe, when a herd is infected with a virus, it's usually not one virus working alone. There are co-infections. What have you seen with African swine fever?
That's a complicated question, Joe, because unfortunately in the Asian countries, they tend to be endemic for a number of key viruses and bacteria such as Actinobacillus pneumoniae that do contribute to the mortality. Many of those herds would have circulating pseudorabies or Jeski's disease. They would have one or more strains of PRRS virus. You would have swine influenza as well as others. So what it does do not only increases the mortality and morbidity because of those co-infections, it also complicates the clinical diagnostics. Fortunately, many of those we don't have to face here in the U.S. We are aware that PRRS and influenza do circulate within our populations, and so that further emphasizes why our diagnostic laboratories have to be active, ready, and we need to continue to push forward for pig side test. What our industry wants to continue to do is to develop sampling methods that are accepted for ASF and pig side diagnostics that are readily available, that are accurate for determining the positive or negative status of ASF. We recognize that any pig side tests have to be confirmed, but you'd like to set up a system that would allow confirmation and then also allow use of pig side test once a site has been confirmed. And then you would be expected that we would have to also do confirmatory tests along the way in parallel with the pig side test.